And recording is on. Okay.
Yeah, please go on.
Sorry. And again, women's status in society. No matter what you do, no matter how educated you are, or where you are professionally, you're always treated as a second citizen. And it's also very important to understand the social support. So women do not have a lot of social support when they want to uh, go out and seek support from others in fighting against family members. So how many times does it happen that you go out and tell your family members or your friends that you're facing domestic violence and they support you? That doesn't happen very often in India. And so these things affect a lot when we're dealing with cases like these. uh, Again, like apart from that, I think there are other issues also that matters. Like during childhood, there's less importance given to the education of female children. So a lot of females who are in rural India or in villages, they tend to face domestic violence more than women in urban area. Domestic violence, mothers pregnant, children, may other cultural factors that affect this. But yeah, I mean, these are some of the very prominent ones that come to my mind.
Okay,
Thank
thanks,
you.
Bhumika, for that. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Pallavi Pratap. And Titisha here has a question for Pallavi. Please go ahead.
Good
Tinisha,
evening,
sorry.
Pallavi.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Good
Hi.
evening, Pallavi ma'am. First of all, we're very honored to have a person as accomplished as you on our
Wow.
panel. Uh, so, as a World Health Organization report states that the prevalence of domestic violence ranges from 23% in high income countries and 38% in Southeast Asia. Um, and yeah, based on this, we can clearly conclude that this is a common and widespread issue, and yet no one is sure of what is the correct protocol to follow when it happens around them. So, what really are the correct steps to follow and to take if a friend or a family member informs you of a potentially abusive situation in their life? And adding to that, to what extent do you think societal norms normalize domestic violence?
All right. Thank you so much for having me here, Avni, and everybody, and all the co-panelists. Well, it's very interesting, and it's for the first time that actually I wanted to talk about my own experience with domestic violence. I'd been married for about 12 years. I got divorced last year, of which 8 years I was living with my husband and my in-laws, and it was a picture perfect marriage and everything. It was an arranged marriage to begin with. I came back from Australia. I'd done my MBA, just landed here, and then there was talks of getting married. So my parents asked me if I had someone, and I said no, I don't. So you go ahead and proceed with an arranged marriage setup, and they did. The marriage began with a very beautiful, how you have the fairy tale kind of a marriage and everything. And it is surprising that I'm a lawyer. Unfortunately, I did not realize that there was a whole ton of domestic violence that I had been going through for 8 years. Uh, this included practically everything. Um, so I could not, initially in my marriage, I could not conceive, I could not have kids. So there was a lot of pressure in terms of that. If you've seen old Bollywood movies, you would understand how people are treated when they cannot have kids. Let's say if there is a marriage which is taking place and things. uh, then, of course, I was of dark complexion. So I don't know if you've been following the Fair and Lovely thing that is happening just now. But I think that really, really had a huge impact in my in law's place, because I was always told that कोनी पे harpic लगाओ तो कोनी गोरी हो जाएगी, या we have a dog, why doesn't he just lick you off and then maybe you'll become fair, things like that. I've really gone through a lot of shit. I've never really talked about it because I thought that, like Irina just mentioned, people think that you are, just trying to be a victim, or you're playing your victim card just to reach a certain level. And these are things that you don't really want to talk about as well. So, so today when Avani and Pragya and everybody else was here, I thought that I'm going to actually go ahead and try and talk about it. So, coming back to the question, I think societal norms, believe me, in an arranged marriage, joint Hindu family setup, or any joint family setup, you would see that these things are happening. And a lot of times, these violences are not just inflicted by men, but by the women of the house as well. So it could be just your, mother-in-law. You would not even know that, this is violence, because this is just like a drug which is there in your veins, and because it has societal acceptance for, I think, centuries now, we just realize that अच्छा अगर किसी ने मेरे बारे में ऐसे बोल दिया, so this is just regular. This is something that happens to every one of us, and so we just have to accept it and move on. But then you keep accepting it, and someday, you just question yourself that, is it really something worth accepting? Because I think I'm more than just my skin color, or I'm more than my ability to have a child or not, or things like that. So unfortunately, my ex-husband, cheated on me and things like that. And this is where the interesting part comes in, because this is where society comes in. So of course, my in-laws told me this is something which is very normal. You don't really have to think of it to be wrong. Whereas I knew about this whole thing for about 1.5 years, but my parents, when they got to know, so there was huge intervention that happened, and my parents and my brother and my sister, they called me up and they said, we suspect something like this is happening. And I said, I've been living with that for 1.5 years. I just never told you because I thought this is something which is very normal, because my in-laws told me it is something which is normal. So that's the date. I still remember 27th January 2016. My parents had called me up, and they told me, you have to now walk out of this marriage. It was about 8 years. I never thought that I will have to, walk out of the marriage, because I thought this is how it is. And I'm going to have my happily ever after, and my husband and I will be, roaming hand in hand 30 years hence, with me with white hair and him with his white hair, and, all the things that you see in all the rom-com movies. But they came, they intervened, they said that no, it is enough. And it's not something that, it's not just abusive. It's not physically, somebody is harming you, because nobody even laid a single finger on me. But then I think something that I really wanted to talk about today was also something called as marital rape, which is really happening in the entire setup of marriage, where I think a lot of people do not talk about it, or they feel very um, shy to talk about it, or they think that no, this is actually not happening to me, when it is basically happening to with everybody, and people just don't want to talk about it. So anyway, so my parents told me that you should just leave him, and I actually did leave him in January. May of that year, 2016, I took my AOR examination, and the following year, I became an advocate on record in Supreme Court. And rest, as they say, is history. So you just have to keep moving on. You have to have all these smiley faces of these girls who keep motivating you to, do a good job and move on. But believe me, the kind of clients that I get of domestic violence, and um, the survivors, um, they have a story. They all have a story which is probably 1,000 times worse than I have. And I think there is a lot that law can do, but unfortunately is not able to do. Like Irina just said, cases of domestic violence would not even see a hearing for 8 months. Protection officer will not come for at least 10 dates after dates after dates. And it is a reality that we are facing. Women are asked to leave their matrimonial houses, and poor women, they just don't know where to go, because if they have a child, and unfortunately if that child happens to be a girl, that becomes all the more paramount. And as a matter of fact, a very recently, last week only, I had a client. She is in her early 50s, and she was talking about the same thing. And the father and the brother have refused to help because they think that this is completely against the society's norm. So you have to have society's acceptance in that sense, and that actually starts with your own family, if they are able to help you or not. I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Yes, ma'am. I think your story also tells us that, the strata of society that you belong to really does not affect if
It just
domestic
doesn't, yeah.
violence can happen to you or not. Exactly. And thank you so much for sharing your story.
No
Does
worries.
anyone else have any inputs on the question?
No, I
Anyone
think we'll
other
talk about the
panelists?
second round because I'm still kind of, I'm still kind of taking in what you said, Pallavi, because I know that, like the society thinks that lawyers and, women who are in law are kind of these bold women, right? Very difficult for people around us to accept that even women who are seen as confident, bold lawyers themselves, could go through this. I have I used to practice in a small district called Harda, right? And I would
Okay.
have women who would keep like this big a parda, right? And they would come and complain, and they would kind of talk about it as if they kind of feel in their universe that this is only them, who are victims or who could be potentially victims, right? Which is why I think stories like yours are so empowering, because then kind of so in a way women kind of realize that we're all in this together,
Yeah.
irrespective
Yeah.
of our backgrounds, and that's such an unfortunate thing, but that's just the reality of where we are living today.
Avni,
So
you won't believe, for 2 years, I just come back from Australia. I'd done my research in France, and I just come back and I got married to this family. And there, you won't believe, for 2 years, I was supposed to do that ghungat and keep my, the chehra chupake, whatever. And I was an investment banker by the time. So what used to really happen was that I would put that ghungat and then I would get out, change my clothes into whatever it was for 2 whole years. And then my father comes in one day and says, मतलब मैंने तुम्हें इतना पढ़ाया था इसलिए कि तुम घूंघट रख रख के घूमो. So somebody has to come from outside to intervene. Otherwise, these things, we just, for 2 years I did not realize that this was something that I was not supposed to do. I mean, to wear what I want to, which is decent enough, is something that should be acceptable to people. But no, I did not realize it. And I've studied abroad and I've lived abroad and I know everything. I did not realize it was something that was wrong. So maybe I was dumb or something, but it was just there. It was for
Pallavi,
somebody else to come and tell me about it.
yeah, no,
This,
Pallavi, but you were not at all dumb, and I think I can tell you, I have my own story, but today I'm not a panelist, but I can tell you that, the best of us face this. In fact, there are a lot of
absolutely.
fantastic courses, and especially a TEDx talk, which talks
Yeah,
about how women who are victims of any kind of violence, there is a certain pattern that you can see, which is why these conversations
absolutely.
are so important for people who are listening, that, it's not just a type of women who kind of,
Correct.
fall
Correct.
for it. So thank you so
Absolutely.
much for it.
Absolutely.
So I request you now, Shikhar, to bring in our fourth speaker and please ask your question to Amit. Go ahead, Shikhar.
Yeah, hi Amit sir. It's really great to have you here. So my question to you is that since you teach criminal law from a psychological lens, how much do you think is psychoanalysis useful and why in understanding a law and specifically Domestic Violence Act?
Okay, thank you, Shikhar, for your question. I think what I will say is something that goes in line with what the other speakers were saying. But I think let me start with a very basic thing that you asked me: why psychoanalysis to understand the law or criminal law? So I think let me start with the three. When we talk about domestic violence, what I see as three pillars of domesticity, which is the home, the family, and marriage. And I feel that we always have this kind of romantic and notion of all the three of them, as Irina was sort of pointing out. Home is a place where we are safe, and family is a place where I feel secure, and marriage or marriage-like institutions are something that is sacred and wonderful. So what we generally do not want to acknowledge or accept, as the previous speakers were saying, an absolute denial of the fact that there is an underside to these pillars of these institutions, which is violent, and which is so violent that home can be not just safe but also a prison-like institution, and home and family can be suffocating, just like marriage can become a trap, as many of us are talking. But this is something that is generally we're not willing to accept it, either as individuals or as culture or as a society. We want to live in denial of that fact. And that is why I think, Shikhar, psychoanalysis is important, because psychoanalysis would would challenge us to confront these psychic complexities that we have, with and within these institutions, and would ask the question that why is there this with this denial, this non-willingness, or as one writer would say, a resistance to resist, that we can't resist. There's a resistance within us to resist, and so on. And maybe that's why one of the writers very poignantly said that feminism is perhaps the longest revolution. And I think why she said this is because it is the longest revolution because it is so difficult to show and it is so difficult to demonstrate that actually it is violence in the domestic setup or in the family is not something which is an aberration, because this is what we want to believe, that it's a lovely thing and this is an exception which has happened. But it is so difficult to show perhaps for us that violence is not an aberration but a constitutive part. So domesticity is premised upon violence, is something that we do not want to acknowledge. And I would make two quick more points to your question, that what's the relevance of a subject like psychoanalysis. But I would move on to say that in this sense that how we are devoted to our fantasies of the family, home, and marriage, the Domestic Violence Act as a legislation is an important one. And again, I'm saying right now, at least as a law, and because we also don't have, we have laws which are horrible. Like I think Pallavi just mentioned that marital rape is no rape in India. So you can rape your wife, and that's not rape, that's an exception to the rape law. So some laws are insane, but there are some laws which may be good, and they are not implemented. So we have to make a distinction between mad laws and decent laws which are indecently interpreted. So I think Domestic Violence Act is an extremely wonderful legislation, conceptually. And the fact that, first of all, it's a civil legislation. So criminal law is just like one part of it, if civil remedies are not taken into account. But otherwise, it's a civil legislation, and I personally feel that this is that the law recognizes the fact that it is very hard for an abused woman to step out of the violence and take recourse to the criminal law or to go to the police, state machinery. And because these institutions, which I was talking about, home, family, and marriage, have trapped us psychically, and therefore directly jumping into criminal law can be counterproductive. So I think in that sense, it's an extremely useful legislation. And finally, to come back to your question again, that how psychoanalysis is extremely important for, and even especially for domestic violence. So I think psychoanalysis really asks us to confront some difficult questions and categories which are our fantasies and imaginaries. Like, for example, psychoanalysis asks us to unpack the category of love. And I think that's so important because love is, I feel, the bedrock of all the three institutions that I'm talking about. So home, family, marriage, they're all at some way premised on love. And psychoanalysis helps us to understand that how love is also something that can be gendered, and how love can also take violent forms and also very unequal and unreasonable demands in the name of love. And that's very important for us to understand. In this sense, we need to also in this sense, we need to also do this, and through any lens, but psychoanalysis is a useful lens, understand men and the violence in men, the masculinity where it comes from. So my point is that the masculinity and the mad violence of that men display is not sufficiently answered by only a sociological account, that they are raised in this kind of a fashion that, which is true. I mean, I accept that. But that's a necessary account, but not sufficient account. And that's where I think one need to ask a question, and that why do men lose control? And psychoanalysis and various writers have told us that basically there is one has to tap and understand a kind of an insecurity that comes when men when they are not in control, they lose themselves. So when they're not in control, to lose themselves. And so in losing that oneself, there is a kind of an insecurity or importance in that violence, as the felicitous phrase of Hannah Arendt, the importance of bigness. So men who are insecure are more violent, blame women blame women more, and they project their insecurities on them, as one of the writers would say. And when they don't know what to do, so this is what goes on. And I think that is why it is extremely important for us to use this tool to understand and the problem in a serious way, and begin to question our own desires, which is the central category in psychoanalysis. That how do we understand, confront our own desires, which makes us violent towards others and also towards our own self in multiple ways. And we need to defantasize these lovely categories and of home, marriage, and family. And these are categories which are I mean, everyone is invested in them. So those who would be subversive, they are also invested in them. I mean, so for example, people across genders would like to think of these categories as categories of living life. So I think that's why it's extremely important for us to use the tool of psychoanalysis. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Amit. But I have a very pressing
Definitely,
question
sir.
where you stopped, and perhaps that's a question that maybe any of the speakers can take. Shikhar, you want to add to it? Please feel free to add to this question. But as Amit is pointing out, that there is a psychoanalysis, reasoning behind why men behave the way they behave. Specifically, I have a question that to Amit, that this also applies to women, right? Who may be the perpetrators of domestic violence. I mean, although in India we know that the domestic violence, is primarily in terms of legal aspects of it, catering to women, right? And the reason there is that we still have a large number of women who are suffering from domestic violence, but clearly there are also handful. I mean, in terms of the bigger picture, there are cases where men too have been victims of domestic violence. So would you say that the psychoanalysis lens applies equally to men and women when we're kind of seeing their behavior, or does that change? Are there aspects to it that we need to understand?
Okay. So Avni, I would say that one need to look at it in this fashion, that, so when you say that, I mean, of course, the lens of psychoanalysis will co-equally apply, okay? Because we are talking of a psyche which has an unconscious, which has a side to us which we don't know, okay, and deny in some ways. But when it will play out, so it will be different. So for example, the kind of the effect on men of a certain kind of violence coming from insecurity, and coming straight to your question, that would women be the perpetrator of domestic violence? So I would say this is where the social setup comes in, that it will be extremely difficult for a woman to be equal to a man in being a perpetrator of domestic violence, because the social conditions would not permit it. So it is far more difficult for a woman to step out of a marriage as opposed to a man stepping out of a marriage. I mean, look at the testimonies of our panelists who are saying that it is normal for a man to cheat on someone else, but this is something which is unacceptable for a woman. But yes, what you are asking is a point that, again, I want to go back to this question of the feminism as the longest revolution, that women can be perpetrator to in this extent, that if we don't want to ask a question, so if we do not want to ask a question, that why is it that a woman would refuse to get out? So I mean, Irina was saying, get out. I mean, it's a struggle, it's difficult, do not be there. So what is it that makes us stay? What is it that makes us stick with the abuser? And trust me, it is not just financial. Trust me, it is, I mean, and there's a lot of work on that. It is not just financial, it is not just the sociological. There's something psychic about it that we do not want to, that we want to stay on. And this is a category which I would say here one need to be bold enough to say that this is a kind of a complicity which we have to address. This is a kind of a complicity which is difficult and we have to address. And I'll quickly sort of make this point. This is something that I mean, this is something which I'm sure you will discuss in your next panel. But this is extremely important to notice that Domestic Violence Act is in that sense a legislation which is understanding the psychic complexity. Because for example, section 19 of Domestic Violence Act, which talks about residence order, okay? So that a woman can have a residence, separate residence within the home, where a man would be restrained from entering or in-laws would be restrained. I feel that this is a kind of a recognition that it is difficult for women to live. And which is not something that, so I'm saying we have to understand that this is how we are psychically situated and do something about it. But at the same time, we have to work and figure out why this stickiness, okay? So I feel this provision ensures that the psychic conflict is recognized and invested, and you are invested in the person abusing you. So it's not so easy that I'm invested there, which is why I'm taking the example of these categories. These are categories we love. I mean, we are invested. I was really looking at Alina's description. From the whole life, we are told that, oh my God, this is what you are supposed to do. And then there is this whole idea, I don't want to be alone. I mean, I want a companion. And the only way we can think of companionship in today's society is marriage, no matter how mad that institution may be, and especially, obviously, more for women than men. But this is an important question and that's how we can infuse the psychoanalytic component in the laws. So it's not something which is separate, okay? And finally, because you asked the question, look around, Avni. I mean, think of this. I mean, since you said women as perpetrators, I'm saying we have to think of our imagination. So, for example, one of the panelists talked about Bollywood, and I was just thinking that the latest sort of version in Bollywood which talks about or which thinks about domestic violence is a film called Thappad, which is a nice film, and which, I mean, I liked it the way Pallavi was saying that there's a taboo broken and people are talking about it. But if you carefully look at that movie, and I was really thinking of making this point. If you carefully look at that movie, then the protagonist in the film, so I mean, it's a very regressive film at one level, because the protagonist in the film is not able to break away from the domesticity. So here is this girl who goes back and performs these stupid, religious rituals back when absolutely madness has been wreaked upon her, okay, and so on. So this woman, and she's still domestic. She's not out of the domesticity. She's not out of it as Irina wants her to get out. She's not like out. Second, I think one of the very problematic things in the film is, and I'm saying this because we think this is feminist, okay, is that she never talked about her right to alimony or matrimonial property. Rather, she denies it. No, I don't want it at all. That's not mine. That's his. I think this is so sad, because the women's movement is fighting for that matrimonial property is your right. It's not some charity. And this film is turning it to, no, I don't want this kind of a charity narrative. This is not a charity narrative. So in this sense, the feminism is extremely regressive in the film when she sort of denies this, So at the end of the day, she wants to come across as a very good Indian woman, who's very good actually. Though I don't want money, I don't want property, though you have this your whole dad's business and so on. I don't want anything basically. And I will also go and do religious rituals at your place. I'm still very much in the domestic, okay? So she comes across as a very good Indian woman who just doesn't want to be slapped. And why I'm bringing Thappad is this basically this is what I mean, Avni, to your question, that in this sense it's a narrative which is in some way liberating, because we are talking about domestic violence. We are at least saying that slapping is a problem. But then again, we are so deeply, sadly into it that even a stupid judge, in the court would say, oh yeah, I like this woman. She does not want property. She goes and does religion. So this is a good woman for me. And in that sense, you really, I don't know if so finally, I should sort of conclude. This is the point I'm trying to make, that, so yes, perpetrators can be everywhere, but in different forms. So of course, sociologically, one can outburst violence, the other can, just become this completely, submissive. But this resistance to resist has to be understood. And unless we ask these difficult questions, we are not moving away from the violence of structure, which also structures the psyche. So I think my last comment, that sociological and psychological dimensions, lovely topic, I think they're one. because the society also structures my psyche. So it's not that psyche is something which is separate from the social, which is what the new age nonsense, I call it psychology, believe that they would tell you, oh my God, think a bit positive and look into the nice side of the life, and you can actually think that violence is lovely. And this is the kind of madness that we are wrecking on, especially and I can name like cognitive therapies of many kind. So no, we don't have to do this. Psychoanalysis in that sense is different from this kind of pop psychology, because psychoanalysis would ask a more difficult question, that your also psyche is constituted also by the social. And so we have to understand, when we are saying women is a perpetrator, what is it in the social that creates a psyche of a certain kind of a perpetrator? But certainly, finally, the woman as a perpetrator is different from man. You can never equate man and woman as perpetrator, because that's a dangerous thing, and that's love today. Because the men's right movement wants to say, oh, everybody's equally. No, everybody's not equally perpetrated. Women are certainly more oppressed because of sociological reasons. I'll stop there.
There's a lot that you've packed in there. I mean, you've actually answered the question which a lot of people ask, which is, if men and women are talking about equality, then why not have a domestic violence law that also covers men? So I think you've answered that question. And you also made a brilliant point about this distinction between the good woman and the bad woman. I recently wrote something on it, how law constantly tries to make this distinction between, oh, she's a good woman or she's a bad woman. Oh, here is a Western woman, here is an Indian woman. And we recently saw the remarks of the Karnataka High Court and the Guwahati High Court. But without going into specifics of that, I see that Bhumika, Pallavi, and Irina, all three want to come in. Bhumika, over to you first, and then Irina, and then Pallavi. Please go ahead. Bhumika, over to you.
Some really good points, Amit. Thank you so much. And in that respect, I was thinking, when we're thinking of women as perpetrators, yes, we discussed about husband and wife relationship, but we could also look broadly in at our families and see how mothers or mothers-in-law or sisters, unmarried women in our families are treated. I think those are very subtle, and I don't think that's ever discussed. I think it's high time that we start looking at those relations also. Highly toxic, highly abusive relationships, and we never are given that kind of support, or I mean, by law or from our family members or friends, that we could approach for support. I think, some really good points from you, and I'm thinking of ways to expand the definition, to expand the outreach to these people. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Irina. Go ahead, please.
All right. Yeah, Amit, those were great points. In fact, what you mentioned about how hard it is for a woman to leave the matrimonial house is a testament to something I've gone through myself, because my daughter and I were thrown out of the matrimonial house one fine day, thank you very much, about 2 years ago. And at that time, it seemed, I mean, it's still a very major thing that has happened to us. But I almost thank my husband for doing that, and the in-laws, because I would never have had the guts to be able to leave myself, because it's again something that is just something one is not brought up to do. You look at every woman, she's self-sacrificing, and oh, hamare saath bhi yehi hua tha. And I now think that was one of the biggest blessings, and I thank him for that action, because it would, I don't even know how many more years I would have suffered in silence trying to fix the unfixable. And as far as women being the perpetrators, I find that rather comical, because I know when I came to my parents, I met my dearest aunts, and a lot of them believe they are fairly liberated. So one of them told me, why didn't you just hit him back when he hit you? What's wrong with you? He's even shorter than you. So, it was so interesting, because they have no concept of how scary a domestically violent situation is. That there's no question, you're in an in-law's house, you're in a joint family, or with someone, okay, he may be shorter than you, but he has so much power, and society has given him so much power, and the women in his family are the protectors of the patriarchy, where they are saying, "Anji, हमारे साथ ही हुआ है, तो तुम्हारे साथ तो जरूर होना चाहिए." So what power do I have in that household, even as a strong enough, well-traveled, well-educated woman? The societal norms and the expectations cripple me of whatever power I might have, because I'm in a joint family. I'm Bahu. How can I speak up? How can I say anything? So I just shut my mouth and I just sit quietly. So I just wanted to put those two bits into your lovely talk.
Pallavi, go ahead. Pallavi, you're on mute.
Just a blonde moment. So I just wanted to add to section 19, like Amit sir just mentioned. See, I have a case which is going on for now more than 2.5 years in Supreme Court only, where this lady, and this is a case of a lady from a remote village in eastern Uttar Pradesh. So she gets married to a guy, and she couldn't have kids. The guy gets married to someone else, and she's sent off to her father's house. And then the entire domestic violence and matrimonial house they want to live in, the entire cases start to happen. So finally, in compliance to that order of the High Court, where the High Court said that no, you have to keep the wife with you, what this gentleman does is, this is a village, remote village in eastern UP, where he has his house, जैसे वो गांव में होते हैं. It's a huge house. He could have easily given one room to this lady. He doesn't do that because he already has a second wife and a child who's there. He about 100 meter away, in some kind of shrubs there which are there, he goes ahead and builds up one room which has no ventilation, no toilet which is available, and this poor woman is living there. And when I told her that, why is it that you want to live there, the father, despite being from a village, said that no, I'll be willing to have my daughter back. And she said, no, I cannot do that, because if I go back, there'll be this whole society which will be telling me about how I actually messed it up. And now he's agreed to give me one room and I can live there. And because there are these, the jungles, etc., I can go and use that area as a toilet. So these things are actually happening. I am here, I'm entitled. So probably I'm living in Delhi, and I can actually exercise my rights. But these women in village are actually not able to. So how does Section 19 really help this woman? Because when you look at the execution of the law, it is completely messed up in so many levels. And I think Avni would actually can throw more light on this. Avni?
Yes, Pallavi, you're absolutely right. In fact, because of that very reason that we have the laws, but then what about the enforcement and implementation? We're going to have the third panel discussion. So we're discussing psychology, sociology now. We're going to discuss the legal aspects in the second panel discussion. And then we have one panel discussion, the third one, specifically on implementation and enforcement. You have these laws, but where is the implementation? And we will try and understand some of those issues in deep. I know Suhana had a question. So Suhana, over to you. And then we have about 10 minutes more. So I will request all the discussants to, just go all out and ask whatever last questions they may have for this panel. And let's see whatever more we can squeeze in. It's turning out very, very positive and some great thoughts out there. So Suhana, over to you, and then to the discussants. Go ahead, please.
Yes, ma'am. So first of all, Irina, ma'am, thank you so much for shedding light on that one line you said, where you said that society has given perpetrators the power who are usually men, and how you don't have to be physically strong just to be the perpetrator of domestic violence. You have financial power, you have just a different level of power the society has given you that people don't usually talk about. So thank you so much for bringing light to that. And my question was with regards to Pallavi ma'am's experience. She mentioned that she's not a victim of physical violence, but she has been emotionally abused. So in which case, since you all are legal experts, could you just run us through how is it that the Constitution provides for any reliefs in this matter? Because it's such a gray area. What is emotional abuse? What is verbal abuse? So how can a potential victim just recognize all these aspects?
I think I'll just
on to that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Abhi, I'll just take like less than a minute. It's so difficult to actually prove mental cruelty in under a domestic violence case. it is extremely difficult, because no matter what you try to show a physical bruise, I will still have the photographs and a medical certificate to prove it. But what has happened to me mentally is something which is very difficult, because it is my word against another person's word. So I think the law is not very clear. And like Avni said, that they are going to be discussing this in later sessions. But yes, it is extremely difficult to prove the kind of mental cruelty one has actually gone through, and that actually affects your mental health for a long time. Like we discussed about the kids, they definitely, I've seen so many broken homes and the kids coming out of it who are, like Irina said, they are completely disturbed and shattered for the rest of their lives. It's very difficult to rescue them then. Anybody else?
Bhumika, go ahead, please. Bhumika, can you unmute yourself, please?
Oh, sorry. Yes. I'd just like to add a small point here. The first instinct of any victim in such cases is to approach the police. And what happens is these policemen also need training, because they come with the same biases that these perpetrators do, or even these victims do. So you approach the police and they tell you कि नहीं ये तो normal है, मतलब इसमें problem क्या है? पर हुआ क्या? लेकिन हुआ क्या? तो और क्या हुआ? But to show me a bruise, show me a cut, show me a wound. Like unless you can see that, there is nothing. And they keep asking you such questions. Lekin aur kya hua? Like there is nothing else. This is it. Can I get justice on these grounds? No, you can't. So it's really difficult when there's emotional abuse involved, like Pallavi mentioned.
Okay, I see Irina, you want to come in, please go ahead.
Yeah, just a little bit about our lovely police. So I had some very interesting experiences with them, where they say कि हाँ तो ये physical abuse हुआ था, तुमने एम्बुलेंस तो मंगाई नहीं, हॉस्पिटल तो गए नहीं, तो हम क्या पर्चा दर्ज करेंगे? पर्चा ही नहीं दर्ज करेंगे, कर लो जो करना है. And then various other ones will say, मैडम देखो जी, आपके करेक्टर में ही प्रॉब्लम है. ऐसे अच्छा जी बताइए क्या है मेरे करेक्टर में प्रॉब्लम? देखो आप 8 साल उस घर में रहे, आपने ट्रस्ट ही नहीं बिल्ड किया अपने इन लॉज के साथ, तभी या हस्बैंड के साथ, तभी तो आपको घुसने नहीं दे रहे. सो इट इज, एंड दैट्स समबडी लाइक मी. एंड टू द अदर वुमेन हु आर सिटिंग देयर, द कॉप्स विल से देखो जी ये गोल्फ वाली एक मैडम है, इनका भी कुछ नहीं हो रहा, आपका क्या हो जाना है? So I finally, after numerous months of banging that door, had to go to court and file through 156(3), and finally, like 2 years later, a very diluted FIR was lodged. But dealing with the cops is another trauma, and this is in Chandigarh, capital of 2 states, Union Territory. I am a known person in the city, and it's happening to me. So can you imagine what is happening to the person who doesn't have the wherewithal or the contacts or the legal help to be able to deal with this system? It is just so dismal. So it really needs help.
You're absolutely right. I mean, that's a question I keep asking myself. If it happens to women like us, then how does not speak. I remember one of the ladies, she's a domestic help. She would come to my house and her husband would routinely, come drunk and beat her up. Regular story we've all heard, right? And I would keep telling her that, why don't you go file a case? She's like, मैडम मैं केस तो फाइल कर दूंगी, पर मेरे पास खर्चा पानी का कुछ नहीं है और 4 बच्चे हैं और वो खर्चा पानी भी नहीं देता. तो अभी एटलीस्ट ये है कि मैं उस घर में रह रही हूँ, अभी मैं किसी और घर में कहाँ शिफ्ट हो जाऊंगी, कहाँ से पैसा आएगा? So women who especially are economically dependent, I think they find it even harder, to stand up on their feet. And there is always that question of that once they take the legal recourse, right? They think it's going to be, for all practical purposes, either the end of their relationship, which means end of money if there is any coming from the husband. And more importantly, they think sometimes, madam, यदि मैं पुलिस में जाके कंप्लेन करूंगी तो ये मुझे और मारेगा. पुलिस तो 2 दिन इसको बंद करके छोड़ देगी, पर जब ये वापस आएगा तो मैं इसको कैसे झेलूंगी? So there is that concern also, that a lot of women face. Tanisha, you have a question. Please go ahead.
Yes, so since domestic violence isn't really confined to, intimate partner relationships, and in India it's very normalized to hit your child, acha bacha khana nahi kha raha to thappad maar do. So there's a very fine line between tough love and child abuse. Now, what are your opinions on it, and what do you think is crossing that line?
That's a very good
Any of the
question. Any
panelists?
speaker who wants to address it in particular?
I think
Bhumika, please go ahead.
Shall I go?
Yeah,
or
thank you.
is someone... After you, Bhumika.
Thank you. I think violence becomes a part of your character and part of your lives. Once there is no limit to violence, you start with, say, a slap, and then it just gets increasingly worse. So much so that, I mean, I'll tell you the worst experience I have had in terms of dealing with children who need care and protection under Juvenile Justice Act. So this was while I was working with this organization called Prayas in Delhi, and we had a child who was about 5 years old, and she was at a shelter home because her father used to hit her, but he used to hit her so badly. He used to hit her with a bat, so she had bruises and wounds in her head, and the psychological impact that those incidents had on her mind was just mind numbing for us. This one day we remember she went hysterical. There was no one in the organization who could control her, and so much so that she was scratching and biting everyone around her. And so they shut the door. It was a grill door, and they locked it with a chain, and locked it. And she was so mad. She was just so upset and so angry that she broke that chain. Imagine a 5-year-old doing that. That's the kind of psychological impact that violence has on children. And there is just no end to violence. I feel it should be stopped at the first instance. I mean, yeah, I don't think violence is an answer to anything. And I feel when parents do that, it's not because of what the child has done, it's because of the violence that's within parents. They project their violence onto these kids, and so no violence is acceptable. And I feel this education and training is highly essential in India, where we feel families are sacred. We never tell our children that they could go to the police and complain about their parents or anyone in the family. If they are sexually abused, if they're physically abused, emotionally abused, they should be taught to go and approach some authority. But that never happens because we keep our families to be very sacred. Our homes are sacred. Nothing goes out of it. Yeah, that's it from my side.
In addition to that, also, so if someone who's in this particular situation reaches out to you, whether it's someone who's a victim of child abuse, or an intimate partner abuse or elderly abuse, how should you go about that situation? In the sense, how can you help them as a bystander or a friend also? Yeah.
Should I take the question?
Go ahead, Bhumi.
Okay. I think all these situations need to be dealt with differently because all of them are covered under different statutes. So, for instance, if it's a child, then you call the child helpline. So, in fact, the child helpline is very, very well established in India. There's not. I would. I mean, I really hope something like that comes up for women as well. But the child line is very, very helpful, and you can just call them up. I think the number is 1099 or something. And once you call them up, the best thing is if they feel that the child is not safe at their homes, then they are sent to shelter homes immediately. So till the police makes a record and then it goes to court for the first hearing, they kept at shelter homes to make sure that nothing worse happens to them. Yeah.
And
Thank
just
you,
to
ma'am.
add to that, Tanisha, while we will discuss again, as I said, this in detail in the next session, but for anybody who's watching and is wondering, यदि आपके साथ डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस हुआ है या आपको लगता है कि आप किसी भी प्रकार से घरेलू हिंसा का शिकार हैं, तो भारत में जो सबसे बड़ी बॉडी है, नेशनल कमीशन ऑफ वुमेन, यदि आप गूगल पे सिर्फ नेशनल कमीशन ऑफ वुमेन टाइप करेंगे, तो नेशनल कमीशन ऑफ वुमेन की वेबसाइट पे सब प्रकार की हेल्पलाइन नंबर्स दिए हुए हैं. भूमिका ने हमें बताया चाइल्ड हेल्पलाइन, वुमेन हेल्पलाइन के सारे नंबर्स जो हैं, और अब तो लॉकडाउन के समय पे स्पेशली नेशनल कमीशन ऑफ वुमेन ने एक व्हाट्सएप नंबर भी निकाला है. तो यदि आप कुछ भी छोटा सा मैसेज आपके साथ क्या हुआ है वो व्हाट्सएप करती हैं, तो उनकी टीम का कोई व्यक्ति जो है वो आपको रीच आउट करेगा. नेशनल कमीशन ऑफ वुमेन की वेबसाइट पे एक फॉर्म भी दिया हुआ है. यदि आपको कंप्लेन करना है तो आप फॉर्मली एक कंप्लेन लॉन्च कर सकते हैं सिर्फ एट द क्लिक ऑफ अ बटन से, सिर्फ आपके स्मार्टफोन से जिसपे इंटरनेट हो, आप एक कंप्लेन लॉन्च कर सकते हैं. एंड अगेन नेशनल कमीशन ऑफ वुमेन की तरफ से आपको फोन आएगा और आपके केस को देखा जाएगा. वो आपको बुलाएंगे, आपको बताएंगे कि क्या आपके केस में किया जा सकता है. तो सारी तरह की हेल्प अवेलेबल है, बट जरूरी है उसके बारे में लीगल अवेयरनेस फैलाना. सो दैट आई थिंक इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. We have last 5 minutes. Any discussants who want to give a last shot at asking a question? Shikhar, I see your hand up, and Pragya. So Shikhar, ask your question. Pragya, ask your question, and then we can request all the panelists to kind of respond to it. Go for it.
Yeah, ma'am, I just wanted to say that Tanisha has actually made an extremely important point, because I feel that violence comes in a character, and I can say that if a person has been abused like as a child, he will, if not definitely, then I can say that he will become a violent person in his when he will become a man. So I think that it is really important that we can address child abuse as well when we talk about domestic violence against women. Child abuse is one thing which I feel is really important in this sense. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, I think as Arena ma'am also mentioned in the start that if a child sees abuse in their childhood, they will tend to either become an abuser or be used to taking that abuse. So yes.
Absolutely. So my question is to all the panelists. It's a popular myth that domestic violence or intimate partner violence is primarily an issue in heterosexual relationships that reside in a traditional matrimony. But how correct is this assumption? What recourse do survivors of live-in relationships or survivors in non-heterosexual relationships have when faced with intimate partner violence? Anybody can answer.
Pallavi, do you want to take this?
Actually, I would, because I have a couple of friends who've been a victim in this kind of a case, specifically, when it is same-sex partners who are there, and it is very difficult because for them first to go, for example, to police or to come to anybody, even a lawyer, is difficult because they feel that they will be judged for their sexual choices. And I think they have to practically come out of it at various levels before they can actually voice out the violence that they are facing. And as far as intimate partner relationship, be it heterosexual, is concerned, I think I think sexual activity per se itself has so much taboo in our culture that people don't want to talk about it, and they will not want to, they might be very happy to discuss about 4 More Shots or some other series that they are watching on Netflix. But if what they are going through, they would not want to even talk to their best of friends about it, because they feel that they will be probably judged as nympho or something like that. So I think that awareness just doesn't come. And as a matter of fact, 2 days before, there was a client, and she constantly kept telling me that, please don't judge me, I'm telling you this. Please don't judge me, I'm telling you this. I said, my job is not to judge you. You have to feel comfortable. It's not my job to judge you. You just have to tell me what it is, and we will find a solution to it. So I think 99% of the times I hear the same story, and people are just worried not to tell things because they feel that the other person is just going to judge them about it. So I don't know if I answered that question well enough or not, but this is my understanding of it.
Right. No. You're absolutely right. I think there is no two doubts to what you're saying, Pallavi, that it is definitely more difficult for people, who are not in this conventional, one man, one woman relationship pattern, or kind of, in a married home, to come out and report domestic abuse. Because as you said, there are layers of judgments. At first, I will be judged for my sexual choices. And then there is also the additional burden of saying that now, by the way, this relationship has turned violent for whatever reason. So I think there is definitely a challenge there. Irina, go ahead, please.
Yeah, just going off of judgment very quickly. The judgment doesn't stop even with heterosexual people. In fact, there's a very strong judgment of women who seek justice, women who have decided that abuse is not what they would want to take. There's a lot of social isolation. Their children are fairly socially isolated. In fact, it's a great time to find out who your true friends are, because honestly, all I do on Facebook is unfriend, not add friends. But I also think that it's important for society to venerate strong women, and I'm really glad that the Womb and Rahat are talking about these things, and with the women's newspaper, maybe get some positive role models out there who don't sort of fit the box of happily ever after, prince and princess, blah blah. Whereas it could be a strong woman who's taken on a difficult situation or left abuse or things like that are currently very much frowned upon by our society, by our families, by everyone around us. They're just probably being polite and not telling me, the ones who are around me. But I definitely think that if you could move towards that, and maybe some stories along those lines for children to realize that we don't have to be self-sacrificing.
Thank you, Irina, for saying that. And on that note, a big thank you to all the panelists and all the discussants for making this conversation so free-flowing and honest. I am a tad bit emotional at the moment, I must say. We were trying to go live on YouTube. This was the first video where we were going live, and we went very well for 15 minutes. Somebody just reported a copyright violation. And I'm just thinking, even when people are talking domestic violence, there is a question of a copyright violation, what have you. In any case, we've recorded the rest of the conversation, and we will